As I stated before, about 26% by composition of our municipal solid waste by weight is made up of yard waste and food waste. This is the easiest and simplest thing to recycle, or what we call compost. Alright, so this lesson is going to focus on what is composting, how does it work, understanding the process, and knowing how you can compost these waste and have a source reduction from the very, very beginning, never needing to throw something out. So compost is very simply the process by which we take this food or organic matter and break it down and turn it back into soil. We're trying to use nature's processes here. So you're trying to create soil. Now, it can be done in your backyard very simply. There's nothing complicated that you need. You can just fence in an area and create a compost pile. You can use, in this case, wooden slats and use a compost pile. Here's a more advanced one, which is a 3-bin system. It could literally just be a pile of material, okay, or chicken wire wrapped in a circle to hold the stuff. Okay, here's the 3-bin system, where you start on the left, and as it starts to decompose a little bit, you mix it in the middle, and then as the process goes a little bit further, you will mix it on the right, which will then be put into your garden as very, very fertile soil. Compost makes tremendous fertilizer in your garden for 2 reasons. Number one, it's rich in organic material and all of the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphates that you need. But the good thing about compost versus industrial fertilizers is that compost slowly releases those nutrients into the soil. So it's a much better thing to use in your garden. You can compost food waste right out of the kitchen, and we're going to talk about things you can and cannot compost. A more complicated compost container would look like this. Simplified, look what you can add to your compost pile. Even cardboard, in terms of your egg cartons and that very poor quality cardboard you can put in without any problem. Newspaper shredded is perfectly great for composting. And then of course you can even compost inside if you wanted to with a worm composting bin. And you don't even have, if you do it right, you don't have any smells, okay, or it's not even dirty unless you want to stick your hands in the compost. All right, so it's all about knowing the right ratio in order to be a good composter. So what is that ratio? What are we talking about when we talk about the ratio of compost? Well, you basically are looking at 2 nutrients or 2 elements that you must put in the right combination, and they are carbon, all right, and nitrogen. So you're looking at a carbon to nitrogen ratio of somewhere around 25 to 30 to 1, where you want 25 or 30 parts of carbon for every 1 part of nitrogen. And if you put your compost, the materials you put in there, in this correct ratio, your compost will very, very quickly decompose. All right, it'll have a good blend, and you will be able to have good soil in a very, very short amount of time. So you're looking about 25 to 1 or 30 to 1. If you don't put in this ratio, if you put too much carbon, the process slows down. If you put in too much nitrogen, it starts to smell. So you got to keep it in the right ratio. Now, that's really difficult because you'd have to know exactly what the carbon nitrogen ratio are of all these materials. So there's another short and easy rule of thumb that you might want to consider when putting it in, where you talk about a 30 to 1 or a or 25 to 1. That's a little bit more difficult. So we can think of it this way. It's 2 parts, and I'm just going to try to help out here, parts greens, all right, to 1 part brown. Now, that's real simple, all right, and hopefully I'll be able to clarify that to you so that you get the right ingredients. But the brown is usually more of your nitrogen material. I'm sorry, your green is more of your nitrogen material. Your browns are more of your carbon material. But the ratios are ranged so much that it actually helps to have 2 parts of green to 1 part of brown. All right. So keeping this in mind, again, try to look at your materials and try to understand them. Let me put them in your categories, okay? So we're going to look at nitrogen-rich and carbon-rich materials here real quick. And the list is endless, but if you're looking at carbon sources, all right, these are things like eggshells are great carbon sources. Fruit are great carbon sources. Leaves, excellent carbon sources. Newspaper, shredded up. Sawdust, tea leaves, ash from wood. I can go on and on and on. But those are your carbon sources. Okay? Then you're looking at your nitrogen sources. Just to give you some perspective on this. You're looking at a lot of your, well, obviously your grass clippings. Is usually the most common. Vegetable peels. Okay, a lot of your general food waste is rich in nitrogen. Okay, but grass is usually the one that people are most familiar with and the one they use the most. So what you want again is to mix these in the right ratio. All right, so that you get a good compost, so that you get about a 30 to 1 ratio. But for more complete information, it's very simple. You can easily get that online, and there's many sources to help teach you the right combination of materials. I'm just trying to give you a quick, brief overview so that you get a better idea. Here's one where they're talking about greens. Okay, over on the left here with tea and coffee, although it's not necessary. The tea bags themselves, the flowers, the grass cuttings, okay, organic kitchen waste, the browns being twigs and stuff like that. All right, eggshells, like I said, hay, dry leaves, sawdust, all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, you also have to know what not to compost, and you should never ever compost any type of meat, bones, fish, poultry, anything fatty foods, the eggs themselves, no dairy products, okay, no weeds that are growing like crazy or that have seeds, like in the fall when they have their seeds. These are things you want to avoid. Now the meat and the egg and the dairy, you want to keep that out of there because that is going to create a smell. So if you do it right, you get rid of that smell. Okay? So to understand composting and how it works, you have to understand that composting is a food chain, and you want to make your environment as good as possible for the organisms within that food chain. So the better you make it for the organisms, the faster they're going to decompose your materials. So when you look at the food chain, all right, you can look at it from the microscopic organisms. The most common are the fungus and the bacteria. Okay? And then the real small organisms, which are going to have in your compost, the sow bugs, the nematodes, okay, the small worms and stuff like that. Worms themselves in general are excellent. And then you can talk about the larger organisms, beetles, okay, mites, and of course centipedes. But these guys are a feeding food chain that's going to be taking your organic matter and breaking it down into soil. So what you need to do is to make sure that your environment is really, really good for these guys. Okay? So you want to try to increase as much as possible your base of your food chain all the way up. Okay? And so that's what you're going to do. All right, so what do you need to make sure that your organic waste composts properly? You just got to think of it as you are trying to give these organisms what they need to survive. And if you can think of a compost as a living organism, all right, it makes a lot of sense. So what are you going to do? All right. The first thing is you got to make sure that the compost pile has plenty of moisture, but not too much moisture that you drown the organisms. So what you're looking for is moisture so that if it dries out, you're going to have to actually water your compost a little bit. All right. The second is you've got to make sure that your compost can compost aerobically, meaning you have to have oxygen. You must aerate your compost pile. You want lots of aeration so that your compost goes aerobically, therefore keeping anaerobic bacteria away, because the anaerobic bacteria are the ones that are going to create the smelly materials that are going to cause problems in your compost pile. So they need oxygen, so you need to aerate it. So you have to literally mix it at times to aerate it. Okay? Number 3, make sure that you maintain enough heat or temperature. Not too hot, but not too cold. You want to have the right temperature, so usually out in the sun in the spring is a perfect opportunity for these organisms to gain a little bit of heat. Now, some other things that help on all this, okay, that you want to try to keep in mind is that you want the volume of your compost pile to be just right. Okay, so what you want is a compost pile to be about 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, meaning 3 foot wide by 3 foot deep by 3 foot high. That volume allows enough air to get into the center where the organisms can do their work. All right, but it also provides enough insulation to keep them warm and allow a little bit of warmth or heat to build up. But there's one more thing that might be very useful for people because they don't think about it, and that is surface area. And what I mean by that is if you're going to have a working compost pile, you can't have large leaves, especially leathery leaves like an oak tree or something like that, just sitting in there where the microorganisms don't have as much area or space to break them down and stuff. So what you need to do is when you put stuff into your compost pile, you should try to have it shredded. All right, keeping this in mind, all these different things, you're going to be able to produce compost within just a few months. And then that compost then can be used in your gardens. So if you look at compost on a large scale, like this, it can be done by your township or whatever, where they come in, they take compost that was been dropped off to them or that they collected at the curbside, and then they will have a compost facility, as you see here, where the compost comes in over on the left, and they start the composting process, and then once it breaks down to a level where they're getting near the point where it can be used, they put it over to the right to dry out, okay, and to cure. They like to call it to cure, and that then gives it the good rich texture that you want to be given out to the community or used by your township. So you can have it on a large scale. It doesn't have to be done just at home. There is a local company on Haldeman Road in Schwanksville that does this on a large scale, and you could take your compost to them. They will then turn it, or you could turn your organic matter that you give to them. They'll turn it into compost, and you can buy the compost. Then again, of course, you have unique uses for compost, like this. Something to think about. This is what we have at the Save House. The picture in the lower left is the toilet in the Save House. It is the Sunmar XL version, and basically what it does is as you add material to it, it actually composts the material, and then every 3 to 4 months you can pull out the soil, which is completely composted, and return it to nature. All right, the waterless toilets, great advantage. And if you want, go online. A great gift to give somebody is the Poo Pet. And if you're not into Poo Pets, which is made up of composted material, then of course you can have a compost cookie. Thank you.